So Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is the latest installment of the wildly popular survival horror franchise. Resident Evil Biohazard not only is the first game on this generation from the Resident Evil franchise, but it's the first Resident Evil game to have a first-person perspective, and it's the first survival horror game and Resident Evil game to take focus on the PlayStation VR. As far as the style of the gameplay and the first-person perspective and everything new about Resident Evil Biohazard, this is probably the biggest breath of fresh air for the franchise since Resident Evil 4. They've stripped away the third-person action elements that they brought in the past couple of games to go back to its roots to just complete survival horror. There's a lot of elements in this game that totally calls back to the original, and they focus this game on a complete standalone story that really only has very small ties to the rest of the Resident Evil franchise. So when you add all these things up, first-person perspective, back to its roots survival horror, PlayStation VR, all of these new elements, what do you get? What you get is the best Resident Evil game that we have gotten since the original trilogy. The story of this game focuses on a new character by the name of Ethan. He gets this message from his wife, who's been presumed dead for almost 3 years, telling him to come to this Baker plantation in Louisiana. So he goes to the plantation to try to find his wife and save her. The biggest and probably the best comparison that I've seen a lot of people make with the story of this game is this is like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre chapter in the Resident Evil franchise. The Baker family, who is your main antagonist in this game, are some sick, twisted people. They are scary as hell, and they're a huge breath of fresh air from the usually larger-than-life villains that we have from Resident Evil 4 until now. Now let's talk about this Baker plantation for a while. This is the creepiest, grimiest, scariest setting that the Resident Evil game has had since the Spencer Mansion in the first game. From the very first step you take into this house, you know you are in some deep shit. There is some old, decrepit wood everywhere. Everything's covered in grime and dust and slime and cobwebs. There's rotten food all over the place, and the deeper you get into the mansion, the worse it gets. Now let's talk about the gameplay, because that was my biggest worry going into this game, was how is this new first-person perspective going to change the entire way you play Resident Evil? Is it going to fit? Is it going to feel weird? Is it going to feel forced, like it's just a rip-off of Silent Hills? What is it going to feel like? And I'm surprised to say that they keep a lot of the elements of the Resident Evil games that we know and love into this first-person perspective, and all it really does is enhance the dread, the terror, and the helplessness that you feel in this game. The item boxes and the rearranging your items for the little bit of space that you have is here. The limited ammunition is there. The green herbs are there. The files that are riddled throughout the game and the little collectibles that really just enhance the lore of the game. All of that is there. All the Resident Evil classic elements are in Biohazard. And like I said earlier, they really try to get rid of the whole third-person action element that they were starting to get really criticized for in episode 5 and 6, and now they brought it back to survival horror. So everything is about puzzle solving, it's about sneaking around, it's about getting through different rooms, a lot of backtracking, a lot of finding keys, figuring out where it goes, trying to just resolve the situation with a little bit of ammunition that you have. Even the combat is great in this game. They keep you to a really minimalistic amount of weapons in the first 2/3 of this game, you know, pistol, shotgun, knife, and you feel damn near helpless in a lot of times. You almost feel like running's a better option, which is just one of those classic elements that they brought back from the first couple of games. Run, don't stay and get your ass kicked. The Bakers are your main enemies in this game, but they're really only used for sneaking segments in the game and the boss fights. The main enemies, or cannon fodder in this game, is called the Molded. They're these black, slimy, clawed monsters where the entire face is teeth. They're creepy as hell the first couple of times you see them. They come out of nowhere. They come up through the walls, through the ceilings. They just come through vents. I mean, they come up out of absolutely nowhere. They really remind me a lot of that one monster towards the end of Resident Evil 4, the one that has the parasites in him, and you have to use a little heat signature scope to be able to spot them. It's a lot like that monster, just not quite as hard to beat. One complaint I've heard a lot about this game as far as the enemies is that they didn't change it up enough. There was no variety. Once you see the Molded the first time, that's basically the only variety of the enemies that you get, and that's kind of true. But this game doesn't really focus on the enemies. It focuses on the puzzle elements. It focuses on exploration, the backtracking, like I've already talked about. So it didn't really bother me that much. There wasn't much of an enemy variety, because to me, the encounters you have with the different Baker family really changed it up enough where it felt fresh the entire way through. Now, the biggest praise I can give for this game, if you have the balls of steel to be able to stand it and you're not motion sickness prone, the VR kicks ass on Resident Evil Biohazard. Not only does it make the game way more fun, but it is fucking terrifying. Oh fuck. Fuck me! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh hell! Oh shit! Oh fuck!
Oh shit! Ah! Cody, how's it run? Oh shit! He's got me. Oh damn. Oh. Oh damn! It's not so bad if you close your eyes.
Chill out, dude. There's nothing that's gonna jump out.
Just naturally, I'm shaking. Okay.
Yeah, you're shaking like crazy.
Oh, what? Yo. Oh, what do you want? Ah! Oh, get away from me, fam. No.
I've seen a lot of horror movies, people. I've played a lot of survival horror video games. You can get me with a jump scare here and there, but for the most part, it is really hard to scare me and to get me terrified in a game. And I felt like that damn near the entire time I was playing the story of this game. Everything about the terror of this game just gets ratcheted up to 11 when you're wearing that VR headset. The setting, the sounds, like footsteps above you, and just absolutely terrifying shit. There were so many times in this game when I knew the direction I had to go or the door that I had to open, but I knew just the way that the sound was, or there was some breathing or something going on. I'm like, I don't want to do it. And I don't care who you are, the toughest man or woman in the world, if you are playing this game, there is at least 4 or 5 spots in this game where you're either going to jump out of your seat or you're going to have to pause and take a little bit of a break to calm yourself down, because it is terrifying. Another thing this game really has going for it is there's some great replay factor in this. Not only is there a lot of secrets and a lot of rooms that you probably didn't unlock the first time you went through, collectibles that you need to get, trophies you need to get, new weapons that you need to unlock for certain achievements in the game, but in the Madhouse mode of this game, which is like its hardest difficulty, completely changes up where the enemies are, how the enemies fight, different rooms that they pop in. It's a completely different experience when you play the Madhouse difficulty versus the first time you play it through on easy or normal. Now, with all that being said, the great new change to the first person perspective, the amazing use of the VR, the great settings, the great villains, there are some problems with Resident Evil Biohazard. The main problem that I have with this game, and this is a spoiler-free review, is that in the last act of this game, to me, the enjoyment factor really takes a nosedive. It is not nearly as good, as creepy, or as engaging as it was when I was just in that Baker plantation, facing off with the Baker family, going back and forth through this plantation, unlocking doors, all the classic Resident Evil stuff. Whenever it decided to expand its world and you start getting automatic weapons and you start having these little flashbacks that starts tying the story together, from that point on, I was just kind of going along for the ride. And the way this game ended really disappointed me. It felt like it was forced in there just to have some ties to the Resident Evil games of the past. I could have done without that entire ending. I feel like it's one of those things nowadays that people just do not know how to create good final boss battles. It was almost laughable, especially compared to the other boss battles. And just the way it wrapped up just didn't really satisfy me. I was like, really, that's it? It almost seemed like they were leaving story elements for DLC, which wouldn't surprise me at all, because that's another trope of today's video games, is chopping off the climax and leaving it so you can buy more stuff. So time will tell whether or not I'm going to get more answers to how everything in that last couple of scenes matters to this game, if it's going to be in DLC, a further game, are we going to see Ethan again? All those questions are going to have to be answered in the future, but the way that I was left at the end of this game was not satisfying. And speaking on boss battles just for a second, I feel like each boss battle was a little bit less satisfying than the one that came before it. The first boss battle you had with Jack Baker was awesome. It was scary, it was new, it was fun, it was difficult as hell. Then you start getting into the traditional Resident Evil boss battles. You have a boss where he just has these little eyes around his body and you have to shoot the eyes, and we've seen that so many times in survival horror games. And then, like I said, the final boss battle was just terrible. There's also a spot in this game where they force you to make a decision to save one person or to save another, and it felt totally pointless. It felt like it was forced in there just so they can have 2 separate trophies, save this person or save this person. There really wasn't any gigantic ramifications for the ending of the game. If you see both the endings, they're almost identical. It just felt totally shoehorned in, and not only that, speaking from the perspective of the character that you are playing the entire game, one of those decisions he would never make. So that part of the game I didn't like either. So to wrap all this up, guys, not only is Resident Evil 7 Biohazard my favorite Resident Evil game that's come out since the original trilogy, I'm a huge fan of 4, but this is the best survival horror game that I've played in a very long time. It's the best PlayStation VR game. Everything about this is so revolutionary and such a callback at the same time to classic survival horror that I ate this shit up from the beginning to the end. Could have done with a lot better ending, could have done with some better boss battles, but for the most part, this is a shining gem that you need to go out and buy if you are a survival horror fan or if you're a Resident Evil fan. I think anybody is going to be surprised with this game, and you're going to love it. So Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, on my rating system, strictly for my music and my video game reviews, I'm giving this game a 4.5 out of 5. So what do you guys think of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard? Are you a longtime fan of this franchise? Do you miss the third-person action elements of 5 and 6? Or is this a great breath of fresh air and a callback to the original games? Did you like the bakers, the boss battles, the weapons, the ending? Talk about it down in the comment section below, guys. Let's get a conversation started on Biohazard. Please like and share this video and hit that subscribe button. That way you get to come back and see me next time. But if that's not soon enough to check out some more of my videos, you can check out a few more by clicking right over here.